Imagine a bald eagle soaring over a battlefield, a loyal dog dodging bullets, and a chicken that served fresh eggs to General Robert E. Lee. No, this isn't a Disney movie. It's the true story of the Civil War's most unlikely heroes. From Old Abe the War Eagle to Sally the Bull Terrier, these animal mascots didn't just boost morale. They're the furry and feathered faces of America's bloodiest conflict. Old Abe the War Eagle was one of the most famous animal mascots of the American Civil War. Here is what we know about this bird. Old Abe was captured as a young eaglet by Chief Sky, a member of the Ojibwe tribe near the Flambeau River in northern Wisconsin in 1861. Chief Sky then sold the eagle to a Daniel McCann for a bushel of corn. McCann then sold the bird to the 8th Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry for $2.50. The men then named the bird Old Abe after President Abraham Lincoln. Old Abe accompanied the 8th Wisconsin throughout the war, participating in about 37 battles and skirmishes. During battles, Old Abe would spread his wings, screech, and seemingly encourage the troops. This earned the 8th Wisconsin the nickname Eagle Regiment. Old Abe became famous throughout the North. His image was used on badges, flags, and other promotional materials to boost morale and support for the Union cause. Confederate troops often targeted Old Abe, considering him a high-value symbolic target. However, he survived the war unscathed. After the war, Old Abe was donated to the state of Wisconsin and lived in a special apartment in the Capitol building. He appeared at numerous events and rallies. Old Abe died in 1881, reportedly from smoke inhalation after a small fire in the Capitol. His body was mounted and displayed until it was destroyed in a fire in 1904. However, Old Abe's legacy continued long after his death. His image was used as the shoulder patch design for the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division, known as the Screaming Eagles. Sally Ann Jarrett. A pit bull named Sally Ann Jarrett joined the 11th Pennsylvania Regiment as a puppy in the early days of the war. Through it all, she provided a source of comfort, pride, and inspiration for her fighting comrades. Sally would hold her position on the line and bark fiercely at the enemy. One thing was clear: a bond of unconditional love and loyalty existed between Sally and the men. At Gettysburg, the gallant little dog became separated from her unit in the confusion of the first day's battle. Refusing to pass through the rebel lines, Sally returned to her unit's former position atop Oak Ridge, staying among her fallen comrades, licking wounds of the injured and watching over lifeless bodies. Days later, after the Confederates retreated from the field, she was found weakened and malnourished amidst the dead and debris. A compassionate soldier recognized her and returned Sally to her unit. Miraculously, Sally had avoided being shot at Gettysburg, but during the Battle of Spotsylvania, she was shot in the neck by a mini ball. After being examined at the field hospital, a surgeon pronounced she would live, but the bullet could not be removed. After a few days' recuperation at the hospital, she returned to the unit with the painful and annoying wound, eventually becoming a battle scar. Fatefully, Sally was in her usual position on February 6, 1865, at Hatcher's Run, Virginia, when a bullet struck her in the head, killing her. In 1890, the survivors from the 11th Pennsylvania erected a monument at Gettysburg National Military Park. At its base lay Sally, cast in life-size bronze. Heartbroken over the loss of their beloved mascot, the men buried her on the field of battle under heavy enemy fire. Louis Fief's dog. After the Battle of Shiloh, a Mrs. Fief received news that her husband, a lieutenant in the Union Army, had been killed in the fight. Mrs. Fief traveled all the way from Chicago to Tennessee to find her dear husband's dead body and take it back home to Illinois. Travel was hard in 1862, especially for ladies traveling alone, but Mrs. Fief was determined that her husband's remains be returned home for his reburial. When she arrived at the battlefield, she searched tirelessly among the markers of the thousands of hastily dug graves of the Union troops that had died during the 2 days of fierce fighting on April 6th and 7th. Casualties numbered 10,000 on each side, she had been told. But she only cared about one: the casualty of Lieutenant Louis Fief of the 3rd Illinois Infantry. At the end of the day, Mrs. Fief was about to give up. No one had been able to direct her to the grave of her husband. Discouraged and grief-stricken, the widow looked up from the burial field and saw a large dog coming toward her. As the dog approached, Mrs. Fief recognized it as her own dog, one that her husband had taken with him when he had left Illinois. The dog seemed pleased to see her, and she knelt and hugged the animal. burying her face in the animal's coarse fur. When at last Mrs. Fief stood, the dog began to slowly move away from her, looking back at her from time to time, almost like it was beseeching her to follow. The dog led the widow to a distant part of the burial field and stopped before a single unmarked grave that stood apart from the others. Trusting the dog to lead her to her husband, Mrs. Fief requested that the grave be opened. Sure enough, the grave contained the remains of Lieutenant Fief. Later, the widow learned that the dog had been by her husband's side when he was shot and had remained at his master's burial site for 12 days, only leaving his post long enough to get food and water. Unfortunately, the name of the faithful canine is unknown. General Lee's chicken. When a shipment of live chickens arrived at the camps of the Army of Northern Virginia, a black hen made a dash for freedom and ducked into a nearby unoccupied tent and proceeded to lay an egg under a cot. Fortunately, the tent belonged to General Robert E. Lee, who named the hen Nellie. For over 2 years, Nellie laid an egg under Lee's cot each day. Lee saw to it that the hen traveled with the army, even on so fateful a campaign as the invasion which ended at Gettysburg. When he began to retreat from that field, and the hen was nowhere to be found, the commanding general joined the search for his pet, and was not content until she was discovered and safely perched in his headquarters wagon. Harvey. Lieutenant Daniel Stearns of the 140th Ohio traveled with Sherman during the Atlantic campaign and was accompanied by a white bull terrier named Harvey. He brought a lot of joy to the men, and they were as devoted to him as he was to the unit. Harvey even appeared in photographs of the regimental band. Apparently, Harvey loved music. At the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, Harvey was captured by the Confederates. Stearns was distraught with worry, but the rebels soon returned Harvey to his mates. Harvey survived the war, as was discharged with his unit in 1865. Charlie. A little dog named Charlie accompanied a battery of artillery raised in Athens, Georgia. The troop artillery, named after one of Georgia's governors, was assigned to General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Charlie wasn't very pretty, nor did he possess any illustrious pedigree, but he was loved by the soldiers. Courageous under fire, Charlie would follow his men into battle, running up and down the line of cannon while wagging his tail as shells flew over his head. An official member of the troop artillery, Charlie would ride on top of an ammunition box atop an artillery limber as the guns rolled down the road to the next battle. He was even saluted by General Lee himself during a review of the Army in June 1863. Members of Longstreet's Corps, rivals of the troop artillery, would occasionally steal Charlie for fun, but he would always manage to escape and return to his men. Occasionally, Charlie would sneak across the lines to steal Yankee chickens, bringing them back for dinner. A Mr. Atkinson, a newspaper writer who followed the battery, wrote that Charlie seemed not to know fear, and as the battle grew fiercer, so did his joy. Unfortunately, like so many of his fellow soldiers, the courageous Charlie did not survive the war. While standing under a tree at Petersburg, Virginia in 1864, Charlie was killed by shrapnel from an exploding shell. His body was laid to rest near the tree. On that day, the entire battery, filled with a sense of commitment to their fallen mascot, fell in line for Charlie's funeral. These loyal mascots remind us that even in war, humanity's bond with animals remained unbroken. They lifted spirits, boosted morale, and in some cases even saved lives. Their stories offer a unique lens through which we can view the Civil War, not just as a clash of armies, but as a profound human experience shared by soldiers, civilians, and their beloved animal companions. If you enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe, and share. And if you'd like to learn more, I've included a link to a book you might find interesting. If you decide to purchase, I receive a small commission that helps offset the cost of bringing you these videos. Thank you for watching.